So question number one is tell us about the young Khalil and the spark of curiosity that led you to ask your parents about your heritage.
Well, thinking back to the young Khalil, and it's been a a long journey. I'm 43 now, and I've been working with my family in professionally in this capacity for the last 15 years. So I really, feel like it's almost a lifetime ago because of my consciousness and where I was to now. Not that I was in a bad place, but in terms of what I've learned about myself and where I've what I've become to find my power. But early on, I was in, my distinct memory is third grade. So I would have been around 8 years old. And, I believe it's kind of customary for, around those grades, you start doing those family history reports. And, you start interviewing your family members and you're, getting family heirlooms and those types of things. And I remember my teacher at the time was still one of my favorite teachers to this date. She was just really incredible. But she wanted us to really, really go in depth, and was encouraging us to do so. So we went and did everything that we could and felt good about it. My parents helped me, my grandparents, the whole family. But when I got to school and we were kind of comparing and hearing about the reports and different things, I really understood very quickly that my story was it paled in comparison to my class of much of my classmates. My classmates, I remember the feeling to this day. So many of them they were going back, I mean, so many generations, for centuries. And for me, I could only go back, to the late 1800s. And none of my family could tell us anything more from that, and the reason for that is because slavery in America broke families up and changed people's names and split everything and totally removed us from our lineage and our ancestry. So there was no way for me to know who my great 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 grandparents were, and or where they came from or anything like that. And I remember the feeling was I felt very empty, you know, because at that time you're comparing, you're a student, you're comparing yourself to the world around you, and you're learning about the world around you. And for me to not have the answers like my classmates did, it made me feel very bad, And I remember going home to my parents and them saying that they felt the same way. And it was they shared with me more. And that same year was when a docu-series called Roots came out, and that was by Alex Haley. And it was kind of one of the first times in television history where there was an attempt at explaining the transatlantic slave trade and what was going on in Africa before slavery, and then connecting it to America. So for the first time, African Americans were understanding certain things that they may not have understood before. They were getting a different consciousness, and my parents were a part of that as well. And so they, at that time, that's when they first said, we want to start learning more so that we can share more with our son, and that he can share more, so that he can find himself and then share more with the people around him. And that's kind of how all this started. But I remember, that feeling, and I remember, or I think about how that we all have those same feelings at different times, and that's really what we strive to kind of fill in, knowing that we can't completely, but we can do what we can to fill in some of these gaps that we just don't know. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that's so interesting. Thank you for answering that question.
Sure.
Were there times as a young Khalil that you felt disconnected from your heritage? And what did you do to connect and learn about it over time?
Sure. Well, from that kind of time that I referenced in third grade, that was the first, real kind of beginning of it for me. And from there, though, what that sparked in all of us, well, I won't even say all of us, in my mother and father, and particularly my mother, I remember from then on in class, and all of my different assignments, wherever we could, my mom would uh, impress upon me and make sure that I was doing something about Black people. And that same thing that I was telling you about, the learn, use, teach, she used to say that to me in a way. She would say, because I, as a young boy, you know, you have your insecurities about it all. And as a black boy, you're extra insecure because you don't have a lot of reinforcement, you know, from all around you, and even from school and the people that are supposed to be supporting you, because they don't know this stuff either. You know what I mean? And therefore they don't know if it exists or not. And they're also, because of being black in America, sometimes that is threatening, you know, and people that, you know, and I'm just going to be very, very frank in this conversation with you. I don't, you know, I don't believe in really pulling punches or softening edges, because I think the only reason that the only way that we can like really get to a better place is if we address the issues and then try to fix those, or, you know, and really, really acknowledge them in the right way. You know, if not, then I think we dance around the issues, you know. But because of that, my mom said, I used to ask though, you know, that insecurity, I used to say, Mom, why do I always have to do black people? You know? And she would say, because you're learning and you're teaching everyone else. And she said, because I know you're not getting it, they're not giving it to you in school, you know? And that was kind of the thing that affected my consciousness a little bit. And as I moved forward, I kind of kept that in mind, you know? But it was a journey, and it still is a journey, because you always are met with uh, a lack of information or some sort of, you know, barrier to the next thing that connects you, or to people, quite frankly, that will tell you that that didn't happen, you know, or that, you know, or ask you why are we still talking about this, why are we, you know, and those types of things always come up. But for me, that was my core. That was what gave me kind of my strength and footing, to allow for me to be a little more confident and a little more, you know, measured when it came to my history and my people's history. I hope that, yeah, again, I hope I'm going to always, you know, answer probably a lot of questions in one, but
Don't even worry about it. This is some really interesting stuff. Thank you
cool.
for answering that question. What are some ways we can learn about our heritage? What advice would you give others that have never considered it or have abandoned trying to learn about it
Mm.
because of the painful past that was associated with African Americans in the US?
These are just incredible questions. You know, now is a time that I think is very good for finding information. You know, if you are so inclined, if you are drawn to discovering, you know, and that's what this is. You know, my parents would always say this is like being a detective, because you have to continue to seek certain things and clues, and connect the dots, you know, and all these things, because it's not all laid out for you in one. You know, if you're reading a book, you may read a name in a book and of somebody who did something amazing, right? But they won't say that that person was black. You have to read another book that then mentions that same person, but they mention that they're black, and you connect the dots. And I've done that before, where I wasn't looking for it, but I'm reading one thing. It's very benign. It's just you know, it's just something that you kind of you capture along the way. And then you know, maybe years later, even you're reading a book and you're like, wait a second, I read about this person in this other book. This was black. This person was black, you know, and then it just blows your mind, because you see that myth of absence at work. You see certain information being left out that is really important to the conversation, you know, and to the understanding. But now we are in a time where Google is omniscient, knows everything. You know, Instagram is a great place because there are so many great accounts now. Of course, you have to make sure that you're going through it with a fine tooth comb, because not everything is factual, you know. But there are a lot of great accounts on Instagram and other social media channels, as well as, you know, just searching things out by keyword on Google, you know, that allows for some really in-depth discovery. So I encourage people to do that. Number one. Number two is, you know, that is seeking out certain, you know, exhibitions, or you know, different types of cultural points that are going on in the city. You know, of course, we're in COVID now, so it's harder to do all of those things. But there's never been an easier time, I think, to find out things for yourself, and that's really what we have to do, because trying to depend on any system to provide that is, I think, unrealistic. You know what I mean? So the only way that we're going to learn this for ourselves, that to a fair amount, is if we go and find it ourselves, you know, and go and visit your website.
Yes. That's actually one of the things, one of the challenges I ran into trying to create the museum online, was that I would have to jump to all these different books. And some of
Sure.
them mentioned a completely different name than it was in another book. Or it
Okay.
would mention, what you were saying was that in one book, they wouldn't mention that the person was Black, but in another book, they would. So there
Right.
was a lot of hopping back and forth. So I'm really hoping that I can achieve to put everything in a centralized area for people to learn about that history.
You're doing a great job thus far, and it is, something that takes dedication, and it takes patience and time and research and all of those things, but it's like really a fun journey. At least it has been for me, because you're always finding out something new that is like really important and really empowering. It's like food for your soul. And so because of that, like it's you're excited to do it, and you just continue to keep kind of putting one foot in front of the other, because there's always more to learn and more to discover and more to share. And the other part of it is, I mean, just like this, the biggest reward of all of this that we do is coming back and talking to someone like you that we met 2 years ago, and to know that you took your experience, not because of it's us, but because what you learned and what you saw on the walls and everything, that you took your experience and have now distilled it through your own lens and filter, and then and desire to know more. And now that you're doing this and now you're teaching, that's just that's the biggest thing. And I think that's the most important thing. And for me, like I'm very humbled by it, because it's really, really a beautiful thing. A really beautiful thing.
Yeah, thank you. So, question number 4 is, tell us about 3 of your most impressionable artifacts or pieces of history that are part of the Kinsey collection. Have those changed over time?
Um, I'll say they change every day almost. Um, because of that same thing I was talking about, you learn something. You might learn something new about the piece, or the artist, or the object, or the time period, and that makes it, come alive even more. So it changes a lot. I deal with this every day. Of course, I'm, as the general manager and curator of the exhibitions and everything. So I'm always trying to kind of go a little deeper and be able to tell a fuller story, if you will. So I wind up learning along the way, and so things kind of get illuminated even more. But currently, well, there's certain things that are constant. One piece that is always constant in my life is actually a very personal piece to my family, which, again, in our collection, it's never been about having the most expensive something, or, this and that. It's been about things that are important to the story and important to our personal story as well, which is then extended as a black family, but then extended to the black family, you know what I mean? All of us. And so in that regard, there's a piece in that is kind of wrapped up in my father's story, as he was reading a book called Slavery by Another Name. And it's written by Douglas Blackman. It was a 2008 book that came out and actually won the Pulitzer Prize that year. And it's a white guy from Mississippi, who decided he wanted to write this book that after he just started learning about, he was a writer for the Wall Street Journal, but he started to write this book after he learned about the peonage era, of Jim Crow, and what is referred to as the chain gang system. And what the chain gang system was, it was an extension or part of Jim Crow, and really was in essence another term for slavery. And that's the name of Doug Blackman's book. His book is called Another Name for Slavery, and it says the subtitle is The Re-Enslavement of African Americans from 70 something to 1940s. And really, that's crazy to think about, right? Because we all know that slavery ended in 1865. But what happened was, after slavery, the era of Reconstruction, happened, And that was a time that African Americans, and I'm answering more than you asked, but just kind of my way of answering it. But that was a time where African Americans were really just scrambling to find their families, to connect, to start businesses, to participate in the political process, to really be fully American, you know, and all of these different things. And we know that Reconstruction lasted for about 12 years. And then there was a rising of a backlash from, from the start of the KKK to Jim Crow laws to all these different things, from white America, that was a backlash that really dismantled the progress that had been made during Reconstruction. Well, the chain gang system was part of that dismantling. And what that was the legal system in a corrupt way, criminalizing Black life in a lot of ways. So there was the rise of these very uncriminal, but quote unquote criminal offenses. They're not criminal in any way. Walking on the sidewalk, if a white person was walking on the sidewalk and not getting off, walking on the train tracks, not always having proof of employment on you, playing checkers with a white person, all these different, just think about that, right? That is, right? It makes no sense at all. None, right? But Black people were getting taken to jail left and right because of these terrible, uncriminal laws, right? So as a result, that went on for a very long time, because unlike slavery, now where African Americans were treated as property, and therefore there were prices assigned to them, all these different things, there was insurance, all of these different things. This was a system that there was nothing like that, and they would just work you until you died. But what happened is, it is also the rise of the criminal industrial complex that we know today in America. It's the privatization of prisons. It's companies that are benefiting from, essentially slave labor of these prisoners, right? It's all of these different things. So anyway, that's a long way for me to go back to the piece that is one of my favorites. And the piece is a letter that was in that book, Slavery by Another Name, written in 1903 from a lady in Bainbridge, Georgia. And she's writing the president, Theodore Roosevelt, because her brother has been kidnapped by the sheriff of Bainbridge, Georgia. Kidnapped. She says he's been taken, and I don't know where he is. And the sheriff is the one who did it. Anyway, this lady who wrote this letter was named Khalil Kinsey. And my father was reading that book, and he got the chills. He just said, that's got to be a relative. And what happened was, he then, over some time, he reached out to the writer, to Doug Blackman, who we did not know at the time. And he forged a relationship with him, and they're still great friends to this day. Well, he's a great friend of ours now to this day. He wrote the foreword for our book. So the book that you have, he actually wrote the foreword for. But long story short, he and my father and my mother went to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And they were able to retrieve that very letter, which probably never made it to the president. I'm sure it never made it to the president. But what's more is that it was amongst thousands of letters just like it. And this was showing how essentially Black people were just taken again and put into this bondage. But what it really says is that was the rise in statistics about that, and started this myth and this lie that Black life is criminal. You see where I'm going with this?
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, so let me go a little bit deeper on that. When back in that time, if you were to get arrested for one of these minor offenses, the magistrate who really, would prosecute the trial was given $5 for a non-guilty verdict, but $10 for a guilty verdict. So I'll just leave that there. So remember I said a corrupt system. So of course, these people were found guilty because it was in the system's interest to find them guilty because they would make more money. And then, but then what you have is a rise in statistics in every newspaper around the country that there's a spike in crime in the Black community. But think about what the crimes were in the first place. They weren't crimes at all. So you have this circular thing that then, creates this image of Black people that persists today, and is the reason we can still have this mass incarceration and this criminal industrial complex and private prison and all of these things. It's based on that same issue. So that's one of my favorites, because when I learned that as a Black man and understanding, having my own experiences with police and having friends who have gone down, have had their experiences with police or are dead because of all these lies, I was able to then say, I get it now. You know what I mean? I get it. I understand. And because of that, it made me feel more powerful as far as how I navigate things and how I can, help to change that and share that. You know what I mean? So that's a very important piece to me. And then also, I didn't cap that off. That we later found out that when, before my parents went to the archives, we found out that she actually is a relative. She's a cousin. She was my grandfather's first cousin. And thus my third cousin, excuse me. And we have roots in Georgia. And so that is a part of our story. That's a part of the American story. And it's just very important to the narrative. Other pieces are artistic. One is Robert Scott Duncanson and Edward Mitchell Bannister, who were painters in the 1800s, and they were traveling and winning awards and being called masters during a time, where we were just out of slavery. So actually, Robert Scott Duncanson was painting in the 1860s prior to the ending of slavery, and he was considered to be a master. He went to Paris. He's collected by the King of England and the King of Sweden. He's in the castle in Norway. He just now, 2 weeks ago, when President Biden and Vice President Harris were inaugurated, they unveiled a piece of his from 1859 that's now hanging in the nation's capital. And his name was Robert Scott Duncanson. But nobody knows that Black men and Black women were artists during that time, right? Our frame of reference for Black life at that time was slavery, period, right? That's all we know. That's all we're taught. We don't know that they were enslaved people and free Blacks that were creating incredible art, right? Edward Mitchell Bannister in 1876, he won the highest award for art in the country, and nobody knows about him. May Howard Jackson, who was one of the first, and also Laura Wheeler Waring, but May Howard Jackson, a Black woman, was creating art in the 1800s. Incredible art, going to college and then teaching. We don't know about any of these people, but they're super powerful once you do. You know what I mean? And then once we learn that, we understand that this has been something that has been going on for a very long time, that we are part of something beautiful, brilliant, great, and that it is multifaceted. There are so many elements to the story, Mm-hmm. And then other pieces that, like I said, it changes all the time, but I'm very artistic. I'm always drawn to beautiful art. So there's just, the Harlem Renaissance is very important to me, as far as being such a brilliant time and a time that encompassed art, community, fashion, film, music, all of these different things that was super cool. You can draw a lot of parallels to today. So there's a lot of incredible pieces of art and literature and different things in the Harlem Renaissance story that we have in the collection that I connect to and are some of my favorites too. So yeah, sorry for the long answer, but just wanted to share some of that.
That was amazing to just know about some of those things. I never even knew about a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, and it's natural. That's what you have to know. It's natural. I didn't either. My parents didn't either. This has been a journey, truly. And one thing leads to the next. And, like I said before, it's like being a detective. You start, one thing leads to the next, and you keep discovering. And we're still discovering every day.
Thank you for answering that question. So the
Sure.
next question is, what are 5 things you hope all people learn from exhibits that honor the contributions of all people, and why do you think it's important?
Hmm. Again, great question. It's important because you get a fuller picture of America and world history, right? You get a clearer vision of the participants and the contributions, and that we're all in this together, right? It's not one thing or the other, it's all of it. And you understand that Black people, African Americans, did incredible and continue to do incredible things that are important and vital to this very country. And without it, it wouldn't be the country that we know. And because of that, it's we have to honor it. I mean, even down to it'll change how you look. Just even when you're in the car moving around, it'll change how you think about things. You know, it changed for me when my father one day years ago, we were somewhere in the South, and we were just driving by homes, and and he put it in perspective that anything done, or a historic home or certain things or a historic place or whatever, anything done from a certain time period to another, right? In the 1800s to the early 1900s, whatever it may be, and prior, was done by the hands and minds of Black people, because we were the ones doing the work. And we also brought so much from Africa, traditional wise, and also certain things like the front porch. The front porch came from Africa. That was something that was on every place of living in Africa. It wasn't something that came from England, or anywhere in Europe or anything like that. Or if you go to Latin America, it's the tango and the rhythms. Those are polyrhythms. So and those polyrhythms come from Africa. You know. So the things that people credit, the tango being Italian and all of that, that's not true. The tango is based off of polyrhythm, you know? And so those types of things, once you start learning these things, it paints a much bigger picture, right? And that's important for people to know, no matter where we come from, that we're all part of this. We all sharing it, we all benefit from it, the whole thing. And for Black people, it's really important because of just what I was saying before. It's life changing, and I think you can attest to that, right? Like, it's life changing. It changes how you look at the world. It changes how you look at yourself. It changes the confidence you have in yourself, and for the better. It changes the power that you feel, and most importantly for me, it gives a glimpse at what the possibility for life is beyond, right? That we're not bound to society's version of us. We're not bound to the media's version of us. We're not bound to those things. We are greater. And so that means that the possibilities and everything that we ever thought we could do or can imagine, it's all possible, you know? And that's the beauty of learning all of this, And so, but most importantly, it is contribution. I think that's the case. I think that America's view of African Americans is just slavery. And then after that, it's very, even down to our contributions to culture and music and everything else, it's taken for granted. I mean, right now, Black culture is the biggest culture in the world. You know what I mean? It's the most influential culture in the world. Our music, our fashion, our look, everything. So, but it's still taken for granted. It's appropriated and taken. I mean, it happens all the time. So the more that we understand what our power is, what our contribution is, the more that we can say, the more that we can be gatekeepers for ourselves and then be self-determinated, you know what I mean, in terms of just creating our own destiny and our own futures, so I think that that's really important. And then when it comes to everyone else outside of the Black community, it raises just the awareness about who we are, what we've done, our brilliance, and like I said it before, our contribution and participation. You know, so that I don't even know if I finished that last sentence about what my pops was saying, but when we would go by every this different architecture and all that, just Black people did all of those things, the ironwork, the furniture. It wasn't just in the fields, even during slavery. You know what I mean? It wasn't just that. So when you start learning all of the robust nature of it, even that is beautiful. Even just as painful as it can be, it's beautiful when you think about all of the incredible creations that came out of our hearts, minds, hands, souls, you know what I mean? All of those things. And it changes the narrative completely because we're no longer, we don't look at it from a place of just simple uh being, it's being stolen and being, put in bondage. We look at it as saying, wow, we are an incredible people, you know? So yeah.
That was an amazing answer. Thank you. Were there times you ever wanted to stop learning because of the
Hmm.
painful history associated with the artifacts collected? What advice would you give others on the lenses they should wear when they examine the historical contributions and stories of the past?
Hmm. You're incredible. These questions are just, and they're it's crazy because I've read the questions already, when you sent them, but hearing them just is still, it's just really, really wonderful, wonderful approach that you're taking to all of this. Um, there can be pain. There's a lot of painful parts. Um, it's never stopped me, I'll say, because I don't think I've ever had any thought that it wasn't. You know what I mean, or um, that it wasn't important. I'll say I've always thought that pain is also very important. It's important for a lot of reasons. It's important because it makes us feel. It makes us empathize. It makes us be vigilant about never going back to that place. Um, all of those things, right? But it also is something, again, like what I was talking about before, in terms of once we learn other aspects, it's not simply painful, it's balanced, right? And even the painful parts you can find beauty in, you can find great strength in, you know and then so then after that it it doesn't become less painful, I'll say, or I don't know if painful is the word. It doesn't become less poignant or important, or and hurtful in certain ways. You don't lose that, you don't become numb to it. But what it does is it allows for you to honor our ancestors and to think about our ancestors in a different way. And because of that, you give more honor, right? You give more honor to the people and those lives. You give more honor to what came from that and all of these different things. And you learn that we weren't passive in any way. We didn't just lie down and take the painful parts. We fought back. We ran away. We developed new systems. We helped each other, you know and we built things for ourselves, throughout all of this. And we created our own cultures and we connected. I mean, thinking about Africans from, coming from Africa, from different parts of Africa, from different tribes, speaking different languages, finding a way to coexist, to still create language, create things that bond us, create cuisine, dance, forms of communication that was undecipherable from the master. I mean, but by the master, those types of things, undetectable, all these different things. It's just genius. It's just absolute genius. And so, because of that, you start looking at it through a different lens. And it's not simply painful. It's painful and it's also beautiful and brilliant because we give ourselves more power once we understand that stuff. The history books, in my opinion, the way that a lot of stuff is shared, it keeps our power from us. You know, it keeps it from us. It doesn't allow for us to understand the fullness of our being. And so, you start looking at the past differently, which then makes you start looking at the present differently, and then also the future. And so you start being able to navigate it a little bit differently. Like, so, like, now, what occurred last year, which was continues to be painful, right? And but also very beautiful too. You have the protests that, for the first time in anyone's life in America, we're seeing a participation from so many different groups of people because their consciousness is affected in a different way, right? the awareness or the desire for awareness was increased. My parents said they never thought they'd see that. They've never seen that before, you know? And if my grandparents were here, they'd be amazed, you know? And so, and me, I don't know if I ever expected it either, you know? But I wasn't surprised by it either, you know, because I know that we're moving towards being connected more. We're moving towards more loving, you know, in terms of, and wanting to be more understanding and empathetic to each other, and supportive of each other, you know, no matter where we come from or what we look like. But, you know, but it was born out of something very painful, right? It's born out of people being killed, being murdered, you know, at the hands of the people that are supposed to be protecting us. And that's, it'll always be painful. I mean, and especially the fact that we see people actually, we see it happening in front of our eyes, you know, not just hearing about it, we're actually seeing it now. That's incredibly painful, but what came out of it is incredibly beautiful. And because of that, you know, that's the balance that I choose to look at life through, and look at our history through. And it helps me, you know, when it comes to how, you know, navigating this, you know, and being able to deal with the painful parts, because I choose to look at what continues to be progressive, right? What continues to move forward, you know, and what that looks like for the future. And it excites me, quite frankly, because it's what our ancestors were looking at too, you know. It's what they were looking at when they were looking at the future. All it was about it getting better, right?
Mhm.
And so because of that, you know, I choose to find the beauty and the brilliance in all of it. And life, you're not going to have one without the other, you know. There's no joy without pain, you know, and vice versa. And you'll never know the fullness of life if you don't know the lowest of life, you know what I mean? And that's the yin and yang of it all. So we have to be able to go through that. People have to be willing to say, you know, I've got to go through this to get through it and get to something better. And that comes down to us learning about ourselves and our history. And then it has to be, you know, an aspect of being, thinking about all of this. You know, I hear a lot of people saying, I don't want to hear about slavery anymore, or I don't want to, you know what I mean? And I get it. I totally get it, right? But I, we can't just move past it until it's been addressed, until it's been fully dealt with. And if we're not willing to have the conversation as Black people, and we're not willing to face it and find all of these empowering parts that I was talking about and all of that, then we won't get past it either, you know. And so when we, you know, when we're seeing things on the movies or in TV or whatever else it is, it's like these stories have to be told. You know, there's so many stories to be told from all different angles, and there's room for all of it. You know, the problem is when it's one sided. You know, is when it's one sided. But when it's fuller and more robust and fleshed out, and people are kind of approaching things from different angles, then there's, you know, a bigger story being told. So yeah, sorry.
Thank you for that. Let's go back in time for a moment. What if the young Khalil had access to resources like the National Black History Museum, the Smithsonian, and a collection like the one your family has collected over the decades? How do you think life would be different for young Khalil and other kids of color in African American heritage?
You know, I am quite fortunate, right? I grew up with you know, in a very conscious family. Even, you know, and even before us embarked, like that third grade report that I was talking about, my parents were very much about, you know, activism and about progress. You know, my dad in corporate America. Shoot, my mother and father met when my mom was protesting and got arrested in college for protesting, you know. So they come from that. You know, we come from that. And prior to that, my grandfather was a teacher and then a principal. And he, in West Palm Beach, Florida, where my father's from, as his first year as a teacher in the 40s, he and other Black teachers sued the Palm Beach School District for equal pay for Black teachers and equal school time for Black students, and they won that case. It was a class action suit, and they were represented by Thurgood Marshall. He was an attorney at the time who took that case. Later became the first Black Supreme Court justice. That case then became one of the building block cases for Brown versus Board of Education. So we come from activism, right, and education and all these different things. So I'm very fortunate for that because being born into that, there was kind of no other way that this would go. Whether or not my parents would have had this collection or not, I think I would have found this kind of direction, but I know that that's not normal. I mean, and I won't say that's not normal. It is actually normal as far as our lineage and so many activists throughout our time that whose families, and people who are living today that are carrying on. So that is actually quite normal. But speaking to my parents as far as them being so diligent about collecting this hit art and history and all of that stuff. But it was early on, so I was, even prior to the collecting or the historical part, my parents were collecting art, and there were artists that my parents had befriended and that became great family friends. So I mean, so many incredible artists became like aunts and uncles, you know what I mean, and took me under their wing, and and just were just incredible influences in my life. And I was also, traveling a lot with my parents, thankfully, and go, and that's a huge part as well. Travel is a huge component to all of this because you can't travel and be narrow-minded. You know what I mean? If you travel and you experience other cultures, you appreciate other cultures. Number one, you meet and interact with so many beautiful people, and it expands your horizons, it expands your mind, it expands your thinking, and that's a big part of all of this. I believe I encourage everyone that travel is like the greatest gift you can give to yourself. You know what I mean? And I was blessed with it from a very young age. And so I kind of grew up with this understanding that the world was very big, and that even though it was very big, there were more things that connected us and that made us similar, no matter where we come from, what part of the world we're in, that there were more things that made us similar than that made us different. You know what I mean? And so I always kind of thought that way. And I will say that my parents and my parents' friends helped me in that thinking a lot. Um, but I'll say this, it wasn't until my early 20s that I totally grasped it all. You know what I mean? That I totally understood the power and the purpose and, all of those things. So I can only imagine, and that's with my background, I can only imagine what it's like for a young person that doesn't have those same reference points or experiences growing up, because they may not know where to look, and they may not know where to turn, and they may accept some of the lies that are being fed to them about who they are and where they come from, and those things. So I'd say that my life would be, if I didn't have those things with me, it would be very different, I'm sure. I grew up, again, I'm gonna be very frank and honest because I think it has to be. I grew up in a time here in Los Angeles that was very dangerous to be a young black male. I mean, and it's still very dangerous, but it was dangerous because of police. It was dangerous because of gangs. And that was going on all around me. I grew up in a great neighborhood and with great family and foundation, so that I always had barriers or things in my consciousness that I was never going to do certain, go so far. You know what I mean? But I have a lot of friends who come from great backgrounds as well, and they bought into those lies and those environments that were going on around them. And some aren't here anymore, you know, and some are, some have had, terrible experiences in life, and that's because of that myth. That's because of that myth of absence. That's because of that lie. That's because of things that we perpetuate even in ourselves, because we don't have enough of the other information, that we're trying to share, that you're trying to share, all of those things. That's what centers us. That's what creates our balance and our square to then be able to launch from. you know if we don't have that, it's easy to get pushed. It's easy to go in a direction or the other, where the wind blows you. But if you have that core of information that empowers you, you stand on your feet a lot stronger. you know you will know who you are, and because you know who you are, you will value yourself you'll value your people more, and you'll make great decisions for yourself, which this boils down to. Life is about making the right choices, to be able to navigate this the right way, look at things and say, nah, that's the bad direction for me to go in. But if you're taught that, or if society is sharing with you that this is who you are, that, when you turn on the news, you're getting bad news about yourself. When you turn on the radio, you're getting bad news about yourself. When you turn on, you know what I mean? All of those things, if that's what all you know, that's who you think you are. How else will you know what I mean? That's who you think you are. And so it's easy for all of us to get caught up in that. And that's, in my opinion, the reason that so many of us kind of, and we sometimes make the wrong decisions for our lives, in terms of certain things that may put our lives at risk, and not to say that we're to blame for anything as far as police brutality, as far as, all of those things. We are not, the media always tries to paint that in some way this person deserved it, right? That's sometimes what they say. Oh, because they pull out whatever bad thing that person may have done, quote unquote, and that's what they publicize, right? And so they make it they make the police or whoever victims, that the ones who were pushed to do this because they had no other choice, right? I never will ever subscribe to that thinking, because I know that we deserve the utmost just like everyone else, and that we are not one thing or the other. We are everything, and because of that, we should be treated as full humans, as full Americans, because we matter just as much.
I completely agree with you that, we have to have a strong core and strong mentality and conscious not to give in to what society says about
Yeah,
us. And instead, we need to learn more about ourselves, even if society says that we're completely different. I completely.
absolutely. I mean, once we learn these little things, I mean, just from the smallest to the largest, we've done. We've invented so many things. We've done, and you just, I mean, I was telling a friend the other day, he works for Foot Locker. He has a very big role at Foot Locker, and he just got there, and I was congratulating him. He's an old friend, very proud of him, and I told him, there was a black man that created the shoe lasting machine, and he didn't know anything about it, right? But there a black man. So the shoe lasting machine is I'll say the automatic shoe lasting machine. So in the 1800s and prior, in order to get the soles on a shoe, you had to do something called lasting, and it was attaching the sole of the shoe to the bottom of the actual, the shoe. And this guy, Jan Matzliger, he goes and works for a shoe company, and they're hand making shoes, hand cobblers, and he was working as a janitor, and he sees the process of how they're making these shoes, and say they're only able to make 2 shoes a day, right? He takes what he sees, creates an automatic shoe lasting machine, gets a patent for it, gets the first patent for it, and then is able to sell it to shoemakers. So every shoe that we wear today is because of this man. Because what he did was he increased the quantity of shoes that could be made in a day. He essentially he improved the shoe industry, right? So the very machines that are used now to put Nikes together or whatever it may be is because of this guy, right? So every day now I put on my shoes, who do I think about? I think about this guy, right? By extension, I think about myself, right? Because we are part of the same thing, and that's just an example of the small little things that not many of us know, right? But it changes everything, and it changes our life in the process, because it's something to be so proud of, right? And something to share with others, because he didn't just make a shoe for black people. He didn't make that machine for black people. He made it for everybody. The whole world uses it, right? Mm-hmm. So I just had to give that as an example, because there are countless examples like that, all over the place. The golf tee, just all kinds of different things that everybody uses, or certain people, or is used widely, that nobody knows a black person invented,
Mhm.
And so, and we could talk all day about that, you know, because there's so many that I continue to be blown away by, because I'm like, I had no idea, you know. And it's exciting, it's joyful, and it's something to be incredibly proud of, and to find, you know, power from.
Thank you for that. That's amazing. What call to action do you have for parents, educators, and the adults of the world that focus on improving communities to embrace exhibits like the legacy your family has created with the Kinsey Collection and the inspiration you've sparked for the Plano African American Museum online exhibit?
Well, you know, I think that it is something to always remember that it's up to us, right? It's we can, but it's up to us in a lot of different ways. So it is people such as yourself who have taken it upon themselves to learn more and share more in a public way, right? Then there's those who, you know, at home have to dive into it for themselves or do it for their children and things like that, and seek out all of the cultural points within their city or their environment, or that they can travel to experience. And I'll say, it's not just, it doesn't mean that it's just Black, you know what I mean? It should be all cultures, it should be indigenous, it should be European, it should be all of it. You know, the only thing is that it's off balance a lot of the time, you know what I mean? So we wind up knowing so much more about other cultures and not as much about our own, you know. But I encourage people to share in everyone's experience, because we're all in this together, you know. But it's really, you know, up to us to support exhibits such as the Kinsey Collection, or any other for that matter, to be ambassadors for it, to volunteer to be guides, or whatever it may be, to share it through different channels of social media. You know, the little things like that go a long way, right? And then it is, you know, what I always encourage is connection. I encourage people connecting and doing things in a group way, that, you know, whether it be a book club or a history club, or, you know, whatever it may be, that just continue, that is a fun way to interact and share information, you know, and have discussions that are, you know, that are intellectual and funny and exciting, and, you know, all of these different things, because it just makes it something that is engaging and interactive for, you know, and that you look forward to. Because sometimes I won't lie, like, I used to look at history as being kind of boring, you know, but it was because it was the history that I was getting, right? It was the history in school and things like that that was redundant, that was didn't represent me very much, you know, and those types of things. And I think that's what turns a lot of people off, is because they're not reflected in the pages that they open, even though they know that they were part of all of that. You know what I mean? And that's disrespectful. It's disheartening, and it's completely exclusive. It leaves people out. And, you know, as a result, I think it's easy to disconnect from it, because either you know that something's missing, or you think that, you know, for the sake of Black history and everything, you think that there's not that much to discuss. You know what I mean? Black History Month in schools is usually, you know, this kind of a similar thing every year, right? Like, no matter what grade you're in, whatever, you're getting a lot of the same information, the same people, and those same people. Sure, like, you want to learn, you need to learn about them. We all need to know about them and honor them. But if you just keep that on loop all the time, right? Then what it kind of does is it tells a lot of students that that's all there is to. That's all there is.
Mhm.
That's it. Okay, that's it. That's Black history. That's the extent of it. And then it becomes boring. And then it becomes, you know. So for me, I was a little bit of a. I think that's what disconnected me sometimes, you know, and made me feel like it was boring. But also, I was that kid in class that, you know, used to get kicked out of class sometime because I asked a lot of questions, or I used to call the teacher out on certain things because I had this history at home, right? So I was getting this history at home, and I was like, wait a second. Like, that person, you know, or that was a Black person. Did you guys know that was a Black person? Like, you know what I mean? I'd do that. And so I was a little bit, you know, precocious, I guess. And, you know, teachers didn't like that. But teachers should encourage that,
Mhm.
because what happens is it creates a bigger discussion, and it actually engages the student, right? But the problem is a lot of teachers don't know it themselves,
Mhm.
you know. And I've come to the conclusion that that's part of the same issue. You know, we have the same issue in museums, you know, is that curators. There's a reckoning going on in U.S. museums and around the world too about who's represented and what stories are being told, and all these different things. And we've been a part of that conversation for a long time now. This is our 15th year. Excuse me. This is our 15th year as a traveling exhibition. So I'd like to think that we've had some sort of influence, on how museums are looking at their content and their visitors and things like that, because we've always held museums accountable. Anybody that we have partnered with, we've held them accountable to the Black community. We've held them accountable to the Black story, and those types of things. But what's going on now is a lot of museums don't know where to start, and a lot of education systems don't know where to start, because this information is missing, right? So that means that the principal, superintendent, down to the teachers, they don't know what they don't know, right? They don't know, and